Hey everyone, welcome back to another What If video. Today, we're going to be looking at what if Luffy ate Blackbeard's devil fruit. We know that Luffy became the sun god, but what if that never happened? What if, all the way back in Fuchsia Village, Luffy didn't eat the fruit that made his body stretch? What if he ate the darkness fruit instead? At first, that sounds like the worst possible match. Luffy is freedom, Luffy is laughter, he's bright, reckless, loud, and impossible to control. The darkness fruit is almost the complete opposite. It's heavy, it pulls everything in, it makes pain hit harder, and it cancels the power of devil fruit users when the user touches them. So this version of Luffy would not grow stronger by bouncing back from everything. He would grow stronger by learning how much pain he can carry without letting it change his heart. And that starts with Shanks. In this timeline, Shanks still comes to Fuchsia Village. Luffy still follows him around. He wants to go to sea, and he wants to be a pirate more than anything. But one day, instead of eating the rubber fruit, Luffy grabs the wrong treasure from the table. The moment he bites into it, nothing funny happens. His arm doesn't stretch, his face isn't bouncy, no one laughs. The room just gets quiet. Then, cups start sliding across the table. Dust lifts from the floor. Loose nails, coins, food, bottles, and splinters all begin dragging towards Luffy like the whole tavern is leaning into him. Luffy looks down at his hands, confused. Black smoke curls around his fingers. And for 1 second, even Shanks looks worried. Because this is not a silly power. This is not a power that makes a kid look harmless. This is the kind of power that makes the room feel like it's about to disappear. Then, the mountain bandits arrive. And the fruit reacts before Luffy understands it. Luffy gets scared. He gets angry. And the darkness pulls. Weapons rip out of hands. Boots drag across the floor. Broken wood and dirt swirl around him. The bandits are not beaten because Luffy is skilled. They're beaten because his fear turns into gravity. And that is what scares Shanks. Not because Luffy is evil, because Luffy is still a child, and he's just eaten a power that doesn't forgive mistakes. So when Shanks gives Luffy the straw hat, the lesson is different. He doesn't tell Luffy to become a great pirate. He teaches him something that's more important. That power is not destiny. The fruit can be dark. The world can fear it. But Luffy gets to decide what kind of person gets to use it. And that becomes the promise. Not just that Luffy will go to sea, not just that he will become strong, but no matter how frightening his power looks, he will never become the kind of person who uses it to take freedom away. Years later, when Luffy finally sets sail, he's still Luffy. He's still loud, he's still hungry, he still points at the horizon like the sea's personally inviting him. But his fighting style is completely different. Rubber Luffy looked ridiculous when he fought. Darkness Luffy looks terrifying. When Alvida swings her club at him, the club doesn't bounce away. It gets dragged into a black pool at Luffy's feet. The deck bends, the air feels heavy, and Luffy steps forward while everyone else freezes. Kobe would still be inspired by him, but he would also be scared. Because this version of Luffy doesn't look like freedom at first. He looks like the thing freedom has to survive. This is where the crew begins, but it's not instant trust. Zoro sees strength right away. He sees Luffy pull weapons out of corrupt Marine's hands. He sees Luffy stand in front of danger with a grin on his face. But he also sees something else. A captain who carries a power that could swallow the battlefield if he loses control. So Zoro joins him, but he watches him carefully. Nami is even harder. Nami has already lived under a monster who uses fear to control people. So when she sees Luffy's darkness, she doesn't immediately feel safe. She sees a smile, a straw hat, and a power that looks like a nightmare. But Arlong Park changes that. Because Luffy doesn't just use darkness to scare Nami. He uses it to tear down the place that trapped her. Stone, water, broken weapons, and fear itself seems to get pulled towards him. And even though every hit hurts him more than it should, Luffy keeps standing back up. That's when Nami understands the truth. The power looks dark, but Luffy is not using it to own people. He's using it to protect them. Sanji would see the same thing at Baratie. When enemies attacked the restaurant, Luffy's darkness pulls weapons away from the cooks. He's using a terrifying power in the simplest way possible, to stop people from getting hurt. So the early crew comes together faster in one way, but slower in others. They follow him because he's Luffy. But every one of them has to learn that the darkness around him is not the same as the darkness inside of him. And once the Grand Line begins, that question becomes the heart of the story. Because the stronger Luffy's enemies get, the more important his fruit becomes. Smoker is the first real warning. In the original story, Smoker is almost impossible for Luffy to deal with. He's smoke. He can't just be punched like a normal enemy. But Darkness Luffy has one of the most dangerous counters in the world. If he touches Smoker, the smoke's body fails. For a second, the untouchable Marine becomes a man again. That doesn't mean Luffy wins easily. Smoker is still stronger, sharper, and more experienced. But he realizes something terrifying. This kid has a power that can drag Devil Fruit users down to his level. And if Luffy ever learns how to control this power, the entire balance of the sea might start changing. Alabaster proves this. Crocodile is protected by his sand body. In the original story, Luffy has to discover Crocodile's weakness, whether that's water, blood, or anything that lets him land a hit. But Darkness Luffy has another path. If he can force his way close enough to touch Crocodile, the sand stops being a shield. And that sounds broken, but it comes with a brutal cost. Getting close means tanking every hook, every blade, every attack, and feeling the pain even harder. This is where Luffy's strength changes for the first time. He's no longer just pulling things in by instinct. He's choosing to step into the pain, because Vivi and Alabaster need him to. The darkness makes Crocodile vulnerable, but Luffy's will is what makes the victory possible. Then comes Skypiea, and Enel changes this lesson. Rubber Luffy was the perfect counter to Lightning. Darkness Luffy is not. Lightning can still hurt him. Badly. Enel would be able to punish him in ways the original Luffy never had to experience. But Enel's whole identity is built on being untouchable. He calls himself a god because nobody can reach him. Then, Luffy grabs him. The Lightning's body flickers. The god act collapses. And everyone watching sees Enel as a man. And that's the next step in Luffy's progression. The Darkness Fruit is not only a weapon, it's a truth teller. It drags false gods, warlords, and monsters back down to Earth. By Water 7 and Enies Lobby, Luffy's fear changes. He's not afraid of his own power like he was as a child. He's afraid of losing people. So when Robin leaves, this version of Luffy becomes more intense, because the Darkness Fruit pulls things in. It doesn't want to let go, and Luffy already hates letting go. At Enies Lobby, he tears through the gates, doors, rubble, and agents with darkness that looks like a prison. But the reason he's using this is the opposite. Robin sees that clearly. Luffy's power looks like it's swallowing everything, but for her, he uses it just to open a door. That's why the fight against Lucci matters so much. Lucci is not just another villain. He's the first enemy who forces Luffy to refine the darkness into a real fighting style. Wild smoke is not enough. Huge gravity pulls are not enough. Lucci is too fast, too skilled, too brutal. So Luffy starts compressing the darkness. It wraps around his arm like a black gravity gauntlet. Instead of pulling the whole battlefield, he pulls only what he needs. A fist, a step, a piece of rubble, a second of contact where Lucci's power flickers. This is the first real evolution. Luffy goes from a kid with a dangerous fruit to a fighter who can shape that danger. Then, Thriller Bark pushes the fruit into a stranger territory. Moria steals shadows. Luffy controls darkness. So this fight would feel personal in a weird way. Moria uses darkness to avoid effort. He hides behind stolen strength. He builds an army out of other people's lives. Luffy does the opposite. He stands in the middle of the battlefield and takes the weight himself. This is where his power becomes a gravity dome. Not a wild eruption, not a small gauntlet, a full controlled field. Shadows, weapons, rubble, and monsters all start orbiting him. For the first time, Luffy is not just fighting an enemy, he's commanding the entire space around him. And that makes him terrifying. But it also makes the question sharper. How much darkness can Luffy control before it starts controlling him? Marineford is where that question almost breaks him. Because if Luffy has the darkness fruit, Blackbeard doesn't. That alone changes the world. Blackbeard's plan is slower. His rise is weaker. He loses the exact power that was supposed to match his ambition. But Luffy walks into Marineford with a power that everyone fears. Admirals, warlords, commanders, anyone with the devil fruit has to take him seriously. If Luffy touches them, even for a moment, their advantage can vanish. But Luffy is still not ready for a war like that. He has cancel powers. He can pull monsters down. He can take more pain than anyone expects. But he can't save everyone. And when Ace dies, the darkness explodes. This is the most dangerous version of Luffy we would ever see. Not because he wants to rule, not because he wants revenge, but because grief and darkness are a terrifying mix. The battlefield bends towards him. Weapons lift, smoke twists. People feel the pull from every direction. For a moment, Luffy looks like himself. For a moment, Luffy looks less like himself and more like the kind of monster the world always feared he could become. And that's why the time skip matters even more here. Rayleigh would not only train Luffy's haki, he would train Luffy's restraint. Not every fight needs a black hole. Not every enemy needs to be swallowed. Not every pain has to be carried alone. On that island, Luffy learns to compress the darkness into more stable, smaller points. He learns to wrap it in haki. He learns to let rocks orbit calmly instead of tearing the bench apart. And that is the bigger upgrade than any raw power boost. Before the time skip, Luffy was surviving the fruit. After the time skip, he's finally mastering it. Dressrosa is where that control becomes a new form. Doflamingo fights with strings. He controls people, countries, families, and the entire lives from above. So Darkness Luffy is the perfect nightmare for him. Because Luffy's upgraded powers don't just pull objects anymore. It bends control itself. Strings curve into gravity wells. Buildings crack towards his fists. Black, violent darkness wraps around his arms and legs like armor. Haki lightning runs through it. This is his version of a Gear 4 breakthrough. Not rubber muscles, not compressed gravity. Every punch lands like the battlefield itself is falling into Doflamingo. And for a villain who thinks everyone else is a puppet, that defeat would be perfect. Then, Whole Cake Island teaches a different kind of strength. Katakuri is not beaten by raw power alone. He sees ahead, he predicts, he adjusts. And if Luffy only uses giant darkness blasts, Katakuri punishes him every time. So Luffy evolves again. The darkness becomes smaller, sharper, more precise. Tiny gravity wells appear where the attacks are about to land. Mochi's fists bend off course. Mirror shards stop mid-air. Luffy is not just pulling harder anymore. He's pulling at the right moment. That is the Katakuri lesson. Power is not only size. Sometimes, getting stronger means making the darkness smaller, faster, and smarter. And then we reach Kaido. This is where the fruit finally awakens. By now, Luffy has learned every stage of the power. The raw pull from childhood, the pain of Alabasta, the truth of Enel, the gauntlets against Lucci, the gravity dome against Moria, the grief surge at Marineford, the control from Rayleigh, the armor against Doflamingo, and the precision against Katakuri. Against Kaido, all of it comes together. The sky bends, lightning curves, stone lifts from the rooftops. A black violet sparkle opens behind Luffy like the moon itself is being dragged into his will. Kaido is a creature who feels almost impossible to bring down, but that is what Darkness Luffy does. He drags the impossible down to where people can fight. And the most important part is not that Luffy looks scary, because he does. He looks like a living event horizon. But he's still smiling. Not Blackbeard's smile, not the smile of someone taking the world for himself, but Luffy's smile. The smile of someone who is still fighting so his friends can be free. That is the whole point of his vision. Blackbeard wants the darkness because it matches his hunger. He wants to take, steal, swallow, and rise. Luffy would use the same power completely different. He would pull in pain so that other people don't have to. He would cancel the powers that make tyrants feel untouchable. He would drag false gods, warlords, monsters, and emperors back down to earth. And every time he got stronger, the real battle would be the same. Not Luffy versus Crocodile or Luffy versus Enel. The real battle would be Luffy versus the idea that darkness has a power that creates a dark person. And I don't think it would. Luffy would look different. He would fight heavier. He would carry more pain. He might come dangerously close to losing himself after Marineford. But in the end, the fruit would not decide who Luffy becomes. Luffy would. Sun God Luffy frees people by turning the world into a playground. Darkness Luffy frees people by stepping into the worst pain in the room and refusing to let it win. So maybe he never becomes the Sun God in this timeline. Maybe there is no Gear 5, no cartoon heartbeat, no ridiculous white-haired freedom form, but he still becomes something just as important. A pirate who carries darkness without being dark. A captain who can swallow pain without having to swallow hope. A fighter who proves that freedom is not about the power you're given. It's about what you choose to do with it. So what do you think? If Luffy ate the darkness fruit, would he still become the same kind of hero? Or would that power eventually pull him too far into the dark? Let me know in the comments below.